Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Brendan SueSee, and I'm presenting on behalf of myself and Associate Professor Shane Pill. Shane is from Flinders University in Adelaide, and I am from University of Southern Queensland in Brisbane. Our presentation today is titled Using the Spectrum of Teaching Styles to Highlight the Decisions of Students During Guided Discovery Episodes. Before we get started though, both Shane and myself would like to acknowledge and honour the traditional owners of the lands and waterways of the country from which we speak today. So, teaching games for understanding, or the Australian version of that, game sense approach, or if you want to use a broad term, game-based approaches, have usually been associated with the pedagogical style or the teaching style guided discovery. Both constraints-led approach as well as a game-based approach, if they don't directly name that teaching style guided discovery, they're quite often associated with coaches or the teacher using questioning or open-ended questioning of players, and this is often described as guided discovery. So we're going to use today though the spectrum as like a set of goggles or a lens to look at two learning episodes that are game-based approaches and suggest that these are more than one teaching style. Time doesn't permit me to really go into a big Spectrum History 101, but I do encourage you, please go to the Spectrum of Teaching Styles website and have a read about some further information if you need to, or feel free to shoot myself or Shane Pill an email at some point in the future and we can directly do some other readings. Some things though, just to think about, we're going to use, or the Spectrum uses what's called a non-versus approach. So this means the Spectrum does not view one teaching style as better or worse than another style. They just are what they are, and it views them for their utility or their value in achieving an outcome. We are not making a judgment about guided discovery or these teaching episodes which we're presenting here. We're just placing them on the spectrum, saying this is what the Spectrum would say they are as a teaching style. And the claim that we're going to make here from these two episodes we're going to look at is that they would be roughly three teaching styles. We're going to suggest they're style B, style F or guided discovery, or divergent discovery H. All right, so first of all, let's have a look at a learning episode which might be a typical game sense approach where we might, to set it up, say to students, we're doing field hockey and the aim is to hit and trap the ball with control. We might have two teams, 4v4, who are playing a small-sided game of where they're trying to push the ball over the opponent's goal line. Let's say the field is basically a rectangle, maybe 4 meters by about 8 meters, to maximize the opportunities for players to make technical as well as tactical actions or decisions. We'll apply some constraints for safety, but also for learning experiences, and say you're only allowed to push the ball, no hitting the ball, or the stick head cannot leave the ball before it's pushed. And we're going to ask the students to attempt to solve problems while playing this game. So the Spectrum would set this up and look at these instructions and say in the pre-impact set, the teacher chooses a subject matter, field size, the equipment, the rules, the constraints, etc. In the impact set, the students practice pushing the ball in a way which most likely they've done before. Now we suggest this because the teacher in those instructions that we looked at before has not instructed the students to discover or create a way to propel the ball, which they have not done before. And most likely we're told the aim of this game is push the ball over your opponent's goal line. We would suggest that in this case, most people will probably, or students, will probably reproduce a movement which they've used before. They won't suddenly make up a new one. We would argue that the subject matter, or suggest the subject matter, is push the ball over the opponent's line, and the students may be stopped during the impact set and ask questions using a guided discovery approach to help them identify the problems which they've encountered. Now, what does the Spectrum define guided discovery as? Now, Mosston Ashworth are really clear here. This is something with the Spectrum. It isn't only scalpel-like in its precision in saying that it is the logical, sequential design of questions, not one question, There'll be 2 or more questions that lead a person to discover a predetermined response. Now, this would mean that the teacher asks specific sequence of questions in a structured process, and the student will correspond their answers to these questions to discover one correct answer. So, again, using the spectrum lens. Now, what makes this a little bit of a problem to say, could 8 students be doing guided discovery? Now, the spectrum would say, there's a couple of reasons why this perhaps couldn't happen, or we're going to argue this couldn't happen, that they're all doing guided discovery. Is first of all, one, all learners are not going to start playing this game with the same level of skill or the same knowledge about controlling a ball with a hockey stick. So they're not starting at the same point. So when we ask someone a question, student A may have a bucket load of knowledge, so they're just recalling knowledge. Student B may not have as much knowledge, they may actually be searching for an answer. The second reason the spectrum, or we would argue, that it is not going to be guided discovery is students, even if they did start at the same point, they are not going to process the question at the exact same speed and make the jumps to discover at the same time. So those 2 factors make guided discovery questionable here. Now, some of the questions that might be asked are, how do you position your hands on the stick to control or strike it? Do you have more control with one hand or 2 hands, etc.? Now, the teacher cannot know who is discovering and who is recalling in these situations when you have 8 students. Another factor or point to consider is if the teacher is asking the question after the event, then the students are again recalling the information, not discovering it at that point in time. So what does the spectrum say about this, or what does it say to support what we're saying? Now, Ashworth said in 2014, there are cognitive liabilities when you do guided discovery or ask open-ended questions to a large group. The process of discovery is interrupted in a group setting. Further to this, if one student, as I said before, has a great amount of knowledge and they recall the information and yell it out, then all the other students, when they hear it, they are not discovering. They are just going, oh, right, what he said or what she said, okay? So in this case, we would say that it is largely practice style B. Now, if there are students who do not have a great amount of knowledge about what was going on, then it could be guided discovery. But it is at least 2 styles is our argument. Okay, if we look at another teaching episode, you might look at and say, can you play a modified game? I apologise for that noise. My daughter has suddenly decided to play the recorder. Can we identify a problem that face them and give them time to arrive at an appropriate solution? Now, this would be facilitated by a teacher encouraging and providing opportunities for them to formulate a strategy or action plan through group dialogue that they test in the game. So, let's say they play a game and identify the problem. That's the instructions by the teacher. Teacher explains the games and the rules, etc. in the pre-impact set. Let's say the students are playing a 3 versus 3 in a small rectangle, keep away game, trying to complete as many passes as possible within the defined area. Students play the game and afterwards identify the problem. So they might come up with example, hey, look, I can't score, or I can't keep possession of the ball. Is this discovery for everyone? We would again argue, no, it can't be guaranteed that it is. Firstly, because the teacher did not instruct the students to discover, but identify problems. So some students may be discovering, but others may be recalling. But again, this was not a deliberate instruction by the teacher to discover. They were told to identify problems when you're playing the game. So, in the post-impact set, students, or after the doing, students recall what happened, what were the problems, and then they're given time to arrive at an appropriate solution. So there's no specific cognitive instruction to discover. So could they, for example, use strategies to solve the problem which they previously knew? Or do they have to create a new one? They weren't necessarily told to. So can it be guaranteed they're all going to do the same thing? So again, some students may recall, but if they did not, then they might create. So then you've got a little bit of both happening again in this scenario. So the spectrum lens would indicate or would argue that 1, for the students who are recalling known problems and strategies, it's style B. They have not been directed to discover or solve problems. It could be divergent discovery. Divergent discovery means 2 or more solutions to a problem. Now we suggest this because students may come up with multiple solutions. But again, you're back at this same problem. If I'm in a group and I'm the one who comes up with 2 solutions, are the other students discovering or are they receiving my solutions? So more than one student may create strategies, but will they all? And how could the teacher be able to identify who is created and who is recalling? We would also argue that coming to a solution does not necessarily mean that you are creating. So the spectrum lens again, finally, if the teacher has not directed students to create or discover, and based on the spectrum premise that teaching is a chain of deliberate decision making, and there was not the deliberate instructions to do this, then the teacher cannot claim that they have taught it. Now students can create out of their free will, but the spectrum would say, no, you can't claim that you've taught that if you did not instruct them to do that. It's a little bit like going in one way, you know, okay, the teacher claims all the good things, but do you accept the bad things? You know, if a kid was maybe pushing a kid off a chair, someone said to the teacher, hey, that's your fault. The teacher would go, I didn't tell them to do that. You didn't tell them to create either. So deliberate decision making is something the spectrum goes with. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation. Much appreciated.